The house felt too large without him. Every room echoed with Richard's presence, yet none could hold him anymore. Janet wandered like a shadow through the halls, her black dress still hanging from her body days after the funeral, her face pale from sleepless nights. The scent of his cologne still lingered faintly on the curtains, and when the wind passed through, she could almost imagine him walking in. She sat in the living room, staring at the mantel where Richard's framed photograph rested, surrounded by fresh white lilies. His eyes in the picture held that same brightness that had captured her when she was just 19, the warmth of a man who built dreams with her, who held her hand through storms. Now, those eyes looked back at her from the stillness of death. The silence broke with a gentle knock at the door. Janet's heart jumped, though she knew it could not be him. She stood slowly and opened it to find Alex. Alex, tall, sharp-suited, his jaw set with quiet strength. He was Richard's closest friend, the man who had walked beside him from the days they were poor and hungry entrepreneurs. "Janet," he said softly, his voice weighted with sympathy, "I came to check on you." Her lips trembled. "I don't think I can be checked on, Alex, not anymore." He didn't push his way in, only stood until she stepped aside. Inside, he placed a covered dish on the table and sat across from her. For a long while, he said nothing. He didn't flood her with empty words. He only sat, his eyes lowered, as if he too had lost a part of himself. Finally, he looked at her. "Richard wouldn't want you to fade like this. He'd want you to live." The words pierced her. How can I live when my life was him? Alex's gaze softened. Because his life was you, everything he built, every choice he made, it was for you. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She covered her face with her hands, her body trembling. Alex leaned forward not to touch her, but to be near enough that she could feel his presence, like a wall keeping her from collapse. That night when Alex left, Janet sat again before Richard's photo. For the first time, the silence didn't crush her completely. Someone else had carried part of it. And in that tiny crack of her grief, something dangerous began to grow. Days blurred into weeks, each one heavy as wet cloth. Janet rose only when necessary, speaking to few, eating even less, but Alex returned often. Sometimes he came with food she barely touched, sometimes with flowers, sometimes only with his silence, which he offered freely. One afternoon, she found herself on the porch, staring at the cloudy sky. Alex stood beside her, his sleeves rolled up, his eyes distant. "Richard loved this weather," Janet said suddenly. "He always said the rain made him feel alive." Alex smiled faintly. "He used to drag me out in it, said no one should waste a storm indoors." Her lips curved despite the ache in her chest. "He did the same to me. I'd be furious, but somehow it always ended in laughter." The laughter slipped out of her then, small, brittle, but real. She froze, ashamed, as though betraying her mourning. Alex turned to her. "Don't hide it. Laughter doesn't erase love, it keeps it alive." She looked at him, really looked. The man who once only stood in her husband's shadow now seemed taller, his voice steadier, his presence a strange balm to her pain. His hand brushed against hers on the railing, accidental yet lingering. She didn't pull away. That night, when he called to ask if she was safe, her voice trembled not with grief, but with something she didn't want to name. Weeks passed. Their conversations deepened. She found herself confiding in him, her fears, her memories, the loneliness that gnawed at her. And Alex listened as if her words mattered more than the empire he and Richard had built together. One evening, after dinner at her home, Janet noticed his gaze linger on her. She looked back, and for a moment the air thickened. His hand reached for hers across the table. "Janet," he said quietly, "you don't have to go through this alone." Her breath caught. A war raged in her heart, guilt, need, fear. She whispered, You're the only one who understands. When his fingers closed around hers, she didn't resist. And somewhere, deep in the silence of the house, Richard's picture seemed to watch, its frozen smile turning into a ghostly warning. The seasons shifted, yet grief remained an uninvited guest in Janet's home. Still, her mourning no longer bled openly across the days. Alex had woven himself into her routine, softening the edges of her loneliness. He drove her to the grocery store when she could not bring herself to leave the house. He fixed the broken hinges on her door, repaired the squealing tap in the kitchen, and even took to tending Richard's small rose garden. Each act of care was like a thread stitching her to life again. But comfort is a strange thing. It can cradle or consume. One evening, after an exhausting day, Janet returned to find Alex waiting on her porch. He carried 2 glasses and a bottle of wine. "Just thought you could use company," he said with that practiced calm. They sat together on the porch, the wine loosening her tongue, laughter spilling out more freely than it had in months. When she spoke of Richard, Alex listened with the patience of someone who had known every chapter already. At one point, Janet turned her head, catching his eyes fixed on her. There was no pity in them now. Something deeper stirred there. Her breath faltered. "Alex." Before she could finish, his hand brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You're strong, Janet, stronger than you know." His voice was low, thick with emotion. The closeness broke her defenses. She leaned into him, resting her head on his chest. For the first time since Richard's death, the silence in her home did not frighten her. But when she rose later that night, retreating to her room, guilt carved deep lines into her heart. Alone in bed, she stared at the ceiling, torn between shame and the strange comfort Alex's touch had given her. Somewhere in the darkness, a whisper of Richard's voice echoed in her memory. "Trust him, Janet. He's my brother in all but blood." It soothed her for a while, but in the hidden chambers of fate, betrayal was sharpening its blade. The company gala was the first event Janet dared to attend since Richard's death. Alex had convinced her, saying it would be good for her to see Richard's legacy thriving. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, polished marble floors, and the murmur of men in tuxedos and women in jewels. Janet felt out of place in her simple black gown, yet Alex at her side made her the center of attention. He introduced her warmly. "Richard's wife," he told investors, "the woman who inspired everything we built." The words struck her chest with bittersweet pride. Yet, as Alex spoke of Richard's dream, his hand rested a little too long on her lower back. Whispers followed them through the crowd. Later that night, after the speeches, Janet wandered away from the music and laughter, drawn to Richard's old office upstairs in the building. The door creaked as she entered. Dust covered the shelves, the air heavy with memory. She sat at his desk, her hand running over the smooth wood. For a moment, she closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of his cologne still lingering faintly in the drawers. It was then she found it. A drawer slightly ajar. Inside, a leather-bound notebook. Richard's handwriting filled the pages, hurried and uneven. She frowned, flipping through. "Alex has been pushing too hard. He wants more control. Something isn't right. I fear he no longer sees me as a partner, but an obstacle. If anything happens to me, it won't be by chance." Her hand froze. The pen dropped from her trembling fingers. Her mind rejected it, whispering it was paranoia, that grief made her imagine threats where none existed. Yet the words were his. The fear was his. A sound startled her, the door creaking. Alex stood there, his tall figure cast against the light from the hallway. His smile was smooth, too smooth. "Looking through old things?" he asked gently, stepping inside. Janet quickly closed the notebook. "Just remembering." He crossed to her, his gaze soft yet searching. Richard would want you to move forward, not stay trapped here. Her throat tightened. Do you really believe that? I do. His hand cupped her chin, tilting her face upward. His eyes burned into hers, and in that moment, something dark flickered beneath their calm. She forced a smile, though her heart pounded. The notebook weighed like a secret in her lap. And for the first time since Alex entered her life, Janet felt a chill creep into her bones. Janet could not shake the unease that lingered after finding Richard's notes. She tucked the notebook into her handbag that night, hiding it away like a forbidden relic. Yet Alex's words replayed in her head. Richard would want you to move forward. Forward, but toward what? Toward whom? The following weeks blurred with Alex's increasing presence. He brought her into board meetings, insisting the company needed her input. He dined with her often, laughing at small things, brushing his hand against hers as though by accident. She allowed it, partly out of loneliness, partly out of confusion, and partly because the world outside whispered approval. People began to see them as a pair, the grieving widow and the loyal friend healing each other's wounds. One evening, after a meeting, Alex invited her to his penthouse. The city glimmered beneath them as he poured wine. Janet walked slowly along the glass walls, her reflection trembling in the night view. You've been strong, Alex said, setting the glasses down. Richard would be proud. Don't, she whispered. Don't keep bringing him into this. He stepped closer. I only speak the truth. His hand brushed hers. She flinched but didn't pull away. The silence stretched between them until he leaned in, his lips brushing hers with tentative warmth. For one breathless second, Janet closed her eyes. Then she pulled back, her chest heaving. This feels wrong. Alex's gaze held hers, steady, unwavering. Does it feel wrong, or does it feel like what you've needed all along? She had no answer, only a silence that condemned her. That night, lying awake in her own bed, Janet pressed her palm against her lips, haunted by the taste of betrayal, not of Richard, but of herself. The notebook never left her thoughts. One afternoon, unable to bear the weight of unanswered questions, Janet returned to Richard's study. She sat at the desk, her fingers tracing his words again, every sentence now a blade against Alex's image. If anything happens to me, it won't be by chance. The words gnawed at her. Richard had feared something, feared someone, and Alex was the only name written between the lines. Her thoughts were interrupted by her phone vibrating. Alex's name flashed across the screen. She hesitated before answering. Janet, his voice came smooth, warm. I'm sending a driver. There's an investor dinner tonight. I'd like you by my side. She swallowed. I am not sure. Please, he said, softer now. You're the only person who makes this bearable. When the call ended, she sat in silence, staring at Richard's photo on the wall. Guilt churned in her stomach, but curiosity, dark, gnawing curiosity, pushed her toward the dinner. That night, she walked into the glittering restaurant beside Alex, her gown trailing like a shadow behind her. The men around the table praised Alex's leadership, his steady hand after Richard's death. Janet listened, her face still but her mind racing. One of the investors, a portly man with silver hair, leaned forward. You and Richard were inseparable, Alex. His death was such a tragedy. Still can't believe he went off the road like that. Alex's jaw tightened, though his smile remained. Yes, a terrible accident. Janet's eyes narrowed. Accident. The word clanged in her ears, sharp against Richard's written fears. She excused herself from the table and stepped into the corridor, her chest tight. From the shadows, she heard voices. Alex's voice. Don't ever bring that up again, he hissed to someone. We agreed, the story is settled. It was an accident, understand. Janet froze, her blood cold. The other man muttered something inaudible, but Alex's tones silenced him. Footsteps approached, forcing her to slip back into the dining hall before she was seen. Her glass of wine trembled in her hand as Alex returned, his charm intact, his smile effortless. He looked at her and touched her shoulder with that familiar gentleness, but Janet felt it now like a handcuff tightening. Richard's words, once only whispers on a page, were beginning to scream. Janet lay awake night after night, Richard's notebook hidden beneath her pillow like a sacred curse. The words had grown claws, scratching at her conscience each time Alex kissed her hand or whispered comfort into her ear. She began to watch him differently. The way he spoke in boardrooms, commanding respect that once belonged to Richard. The way he laughed a little too easily when investors praised his seamless takeover. The way his eyes sometimes hardened when he thought no one was looking. One evening, as Alex prepared dinner in her kitchen, Janet slipped into his study in the city apartment. She told herself she was only curious, but her hands searched with desperate hunger. Files, contracts, bank transfers, many bore Richard's signature, but not his handwriting. She traced the lines, her chest tightening. Forged. They had to be forged. The sound of footsteps made her shove the papers back quickly. Alex entered, holding 2 glasses of wine. His smile was easy, but his eyes lingered on her too long. "Looking for something?" he asked. Her breath caught. "No, just admiring how neat you keep things." He chuckled, setting the glasses down. "Richard always said I was obsessive. Maybe he was right." She forced a smile, but her heart pounded. For the first time, she felt like prey, standing too close to the hunter. That night when he kissed her, she let him, but her mind screamed. Her lips moved, but her soul recoiled. And Richard's words from the notebook thundered louder. "If anything happens to me, it won't be by chance." The truth came by accident. Janet had gone back to the company late one evening, long after the employees had gone. She told herself she was only there to gather some of Richard's old things, but her footsteps carried her to the records office, where the shadows whispered of secrets. She rifled through files, her fingers shaking. Then she found it, an insurance policy signed weeks before Richard's death. The beneficiary wasn't her, it was Alex. Her knees weakened, the room spun. Why would Richard make Alex his beneficiary, unless he hadn't signed it at all? Her thoughts were cut short by a voice behind her. "You shouldn't be here, Janet." She turned sharply. Alex stood in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space, his face unreadable. "I was," she stammered, "looking for Richard's papers." His gaze fell on the folder in her hands. He walked forward slowly, each step deliberate. Some things are better left untouched. She clutched the file to her chest. "Why, Alex? What are you hiding?" His eyes darkened, the mask slipping for the briefest second. Then he smiled, smooth as ever, and plucked the folder from her arms with a gentle hand. "I'm hiding nothing," he said softly, almost tenderly. "You're exhausted. Grief can make us see ghosts where none exist." But Janet saw it now, not a ghost, a monster. As he tucked the file away, she forced herself to smile faintly. "You're right. I must be imagining things." He brushed his knuckles against her cheek, his touch like ice. "Good girl." That night when she returned home alone, Janet collapsed against the door, tears streaking her face. She could no longer deny it. Her comforter, her protector, the man she thought was saving her, had killed Richard. And now he was drawing her closer, binding her tighter, waiting for the moment she would no longer escape. But she would, she swore it, for Richard, for herself. The comfort she once clung to had become her deepest betrayal, and betrayal would give her the strength to fight back. Janet no longer wept at night. Her tears had hardened into something sharper, something colder. Each time Alex brushed her hand or pressed a kiss to her cheek, she played her part with the skill of an actress, all the while weaving her plan in silence. She began collecting copies of Richard's notebook, photographs of the forged signatures. A hidden recorder slipped into her purse when Alex grew careless with his words. She fed her discoveries to Richard's old attorney, a man too loyal to ignore her. Piece by piece, the puzzle formed: embezzlement, insurance fraud, manipulation, and finally, the death itself. The gala arrived like fate's perfect stage. Alex, now sitting firmly as CEO, stood in the spotlight, charming the crowd with his speeches. Janet stood at his side, radiant in a silver gown, her hand resting lightly on his arm, the image of a perfect pair. When the applause died, Alex raised his glass. "To Richard's legacy," he declared. "May we carry it forward." Janet's lips curved in a delicate smile. She stepped forward, her voice clear. "Yes, to Richard's legacy and to the truth." The room stilled. Lights dimmed, screens flickered alive. On them appeared Richard's shaky handwriting, projected for all to see. "If anything happens to me, it won't be by chance." Gasps rippled through the hall. Documents followed, contracts, transfers, evidence of Alex's fraud. Then came the recording. His voice sharp and cold. "We agreed, the story is settled. It was an accident. Understand." The silence that followed was suffocating. Eyes turned on Alex. His smile faltered, his mask crumbling. "You," he hissed at Janet, his voice barely human. Security closed in. The investors whispered. The police, waiting in the shadows at Janet's request, stepped forward. Alex's hands clenched, his face twisted in fury. "I loved you," he spat as they bound his wrists. "Everything I did for us." Janet met his eyes, steady and unflinching. "You murdered love the night you betrayed him, and you'll pay for both." They dragged him away. The crowd stared in stunned silence, some pitying her, others admiring her resolve. But Janet did not seek their pity nor their admiration. She sought justice, and she had delivered it. The house was quiet again, but no longer suffocating. The lilies on the mantel had been replaced with roses from Richard's garden, blooming red against the photograph of the man who once held her heart. Janet stood before it, her hand resting gently on the frame. "It's done, Richard. He can't hurt you anymore. He can't hurt me anymore." The silence that followed was not heavy. It was peaceful. For the first time since his death, she could breathe. She stepped outside, the evening air cool against her skin. The garden swayed in the breeze, alive with color. She bent to touch the roses, smiling faintly as she remembered Richard's clumsy hands planting them. She knew the nights would still ache, that grief does not vanish with justice. But she also knew she would no longer be defined by loss. She had faced the storm, uncovered the betrayal, and turned it into her strength. Janet lifted her head, her eyes clear. She was no longer the broken widow who clung to comfort in another man's arms. She was a woman forged in fire, tempered by pain, sharpened by betrayal. And she would carry Richard's memory not as a wound, but as a torch. As the stars blinked awake above her, Janet whispered into the night, "Rest now, my love. I'll live the life you wanted for me." The wind carried her words through the garden, and for a fleeting moment, she felt as though Richard heard her. And so the widow walked back into her home, not with despair but with quiet strength. Her betrayal had been avenged. Her heart, though scarred, beat with a new resolve. The chapter of grief had closed. A new one had just begun.